Hello and welcome to a special Halloween edition of Northwest Room at Home. As you can see, I'm actually at home this time. Today I want to bring you something from our archives. I have an unfinished chapter from an unpublished second volume of David Dilgard's Dark Deeds, a book that he wrote about crimes that happened in Snohomish County. The second book that he was working on was going to be a little bit more Everett focused, so I have an Everett story of murder and mayhem for you today. You might not think of it, but as historians that work in the Northwest Room, we're frequently asked where the ghosts are and, if a place that someone's in might be haunted. We have people coming in with stories pretty frequently, but unfortunately we lack the ability to tell people that something, yes, is definitely haunted, but we can tell you if we know about something bad happening in the place. David and I used to have a lot of conversations about this. He was a bit of a skeptic. He always said that he knew where all the truly terrible and gory things happened in town, and he was always waiting for somebody to come in to ask about one of those places. Even though he was a skeptic, he kept very detailed files on a lot of these events, just in case the right person came asking. So this is one of those stories, and he had actually started writing it down before he retired. And without further ado, I have The Nelson Canella Fracas of 1898 by David Dilgard. It began as an argument over a portrait of Congressman James Hamilton Lewis. The picture hung in an Everett Opera House during the Democratic Convention of September of 1898. You either loved Lewis or you hated him. He was an attorney with a gift for oratory, and his carefully coiffed red beard and sartorial elegance were legendary. Friend and foe alike called him Hammy or Dude or even Pink Whiskers. That fall, in a bid for a congressional seat, he made a controversial alliance with the populace, amplifying the emotional public response he always seemed to provoke. His picture was prominently displayed at Hart's Opera House when Snohomish County Democrats gathered there. It was still hanging in October when the Republican Party assembled to select their candidates. Somebody expressed their contempt for Hammy by pulling the picture down. James W. Canella, editor of the Everett News, was convinced that a Lowell wood and coal dealer named Ole Nelson had done the deed. Accurate or not, Canella's accusation and the wave of newsprint invective he unleashed upon Nelson aggravated their mutual hostility. When they encountered each other on a Monday evening, October 10th, near Havercorn's cigar store at Hewitt and Wetmore, sparks flew. There were threats and a scuffle. Nelson, the larger of the two, had a game leg, and he flailed at his cane at his adversary, knocking Canella to the ground. As Nelson loomed menacingly over his prostrate form, Canella drew a handgun and fired at Nelson, striking him in the groin. Bystanders carried the wounded man into the nearby commercial hotel, then transported him to the wooden hospital building on Broadway, where 4 physicians struggled desperately to stop the bleeding. Though doctors Hathaway and Howard attempted surgery to repair the damage, at midnight, Ole Nelson breathed his last. Deputy Sheriff Edward J. Dwyer took Jim Canella into custody. Ole Nelson rests in an unmarked grave in the oldest section of Everett's Evergreen Cemetery. If you enter by the picturesque Lich Gate in the northeast corner of the graveyard, his resting place is directly before you. He lies in Lot 57 of Block 6, which costs $7.50 and was paid for by the Everett Lodge 98 of the Knights of Pythias. The absence of any monument or marker makes locating the gravesite a bit tricky. It's a short distance from the Lich Gate at the northeast corner of the cemetery, a few feet west of a monument that somehow evokes melancholy irony with the inscription, Joy. So that's the end of David's chapter on the Nelson Canella Fracas. I looked over some of his notes because I think that there's a lot more information in them that can add some more context and meat to this story. Keep in mind that this was a draft that David was working on, and no doubt he would have added more detail before publishing it. First, I think it's important to know a bit more about whom Nelson and Canella were allegedly fighting over. James Hamilton Lewis was a lawyer from the southeastern United States who had moved to Seattle in 1885. He served in Washington's territorial legislature for a couple years and went on to work on the Joint High Commission of Canadian and Alaska Boundaries to represent U.S. interests. He ran for governor of Washington in 1892, but was unsuccessful. Lewis was also an unsuccessful candidate for the nomination for Vice President of the United States. Just prior to the violence in Everett, he had served in the Spanish-American War, where he assumed the position of Adjutant General of the Washington National Guard with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. He was eventually promoted to the rank of Colonel. These two men lacked a crystal ball, we think, but Lewis would go on to serve in the United States House of Representatives from 1897 to 1899. He also did something fairly rare by being later elected to represent a different state, Illinois, in the Senate from 1913 to 1919. I guess this is a roundabout way of saying that the two came to blows over a fairly established figure in local and national politics. Second, I'm sure folks were wondering what happened to James Cannella after he was taken into custody. I was too. Unfortunately, the library doesn't have newspaper accounts from that time period, but there are some books written in the years immediately following that talk about the murder. In an illustrated history of Skagit and Snohomish counties published in 1906, the events are described fairly colorfully, so I'm going to read that passage to you. The quarrel between the two men had its inception at the Republican convention in Everett, when a picture of Congressman Lewis, which was hanging on the wall, was torn down. James Cannella made some comments on the deed in his paper and cast some personal slurs on Ole Nelson, which the latter resented, hence the ill feeling. The two men met on the night of October 10th on the sidewalk near Haferkorn's cigar store, and an altercation ensued, in which Cannella was thrown to the ground. While in a prostrate position, he drew his revolver and shot Nelson, inflicting a wound which a few hours later proved fatal. Cannella was immediately arrested and held over for the Superior Court. The trial occurred in King County owing to a strong feeling against the prisoner in Snohomish. The prosecution was conducted by prosecuting attorney Naylor and Honorable J.T. Ronald of Seattle, and the defense by J.A. Coleman and the Messrs. Cooley and Horan of Everett, and J.E. Dorr of Seattle. The result of the trial was very unexpected, being a verdict of acquittal, the jury evidently holding the deed was done in self-defense. The first event of the year, in 1899, was an indignation meeting of the citizens of Everett over the acquittal of James W. Cannella of the murder of Ole Nelson. The whole proceeding was denounced as corrupt and ignorant, and the verdict as dangerous and pernicious in its results and effects upon society. They also called upon Judge F.T. Reed to make amends by resigning his office. Probably as a result of this, Cannella disappeared from Everett after disposing his interest in the news to James Lodge. So just a couple things that I also saw in the notes is Ole Nelson was described as a fairly gentle giant and not somebody with a violent temperament. So the people of Everett were pretty upset at, I guess, the accusation that Cannella needed to murder him to defend himself. So the mood in the city seemed to be very skeptical of the whole proceedings. So it appears that Cannella only lingered in Seattle for a few months before moving to Oregon, and he eventually found his way down to Reno, Nevada. On September 14th, 1939, death caught up with him. It seems he had suffered a bad car accident 5 years prior and had spent the last 2 years of his life in hospital for treatment of related injuries. And here's where my trail of the story also runs cold. I was able to piece this together with the copious notes that David had compiled to complete the story prior to his retirement. It's a shame that we'll never have a chance to see what he would have done with the rest of the story. For an idea what that might have looked like, we have his original book of murder and mayhem, Dark Deeds, True Tales of Territorial Treachery and Terror. David liked alliteration. I'll be working on digitizing that and making it available online through our digital collections because they're quite small and kind of fragile, so they don't circulate anymore because they were getting kind of eaten up on the stacks. I hope you've enjoyed this Halloween presentation of Northwest Room at Home, and keep tuned into our Facebook and YouTube channels for more of this from me and other heritage experts around the county as we tell you about our collections and our stories. Have a safe and happy Halloween. Hopefully it's a little spooky, but not too spooky. Take care.